Welcome to The Conquering Truth. I'm Dan Horn.
I'm Jonathan Seitz.
I'm Charles Churchill.
And I'm Joshua Horn.
And so recently, President Biden announced that you didn't have to wear a mask outdoors anymore or indoors if you were vaccinated. And there's been a lot of difference in response to that. And even before that, there was a lot of difference in response between like the Republicans and the Democrats, enough so that somebody out in California said that they'd stop wearing a mask, but they're not going to stop wearing a mask because somebody might think they're a Republican if they stop wearing a mask. So what's driving this big difference that the Republicans respond in a certain way and the Democrats respond in a certain way? Why is that such a dividing line?
I think there's a part of it where what we think of as political affiliation, in the end, political affiliation is really just, they talk about having a big tent or things like that. There's a part of it where they're trying to draw a circle around as many people as they can that are headed in a similar direction, that they think they can move in a certain direction. And what we call political affiliation is really is almost a religious thing underneath it. There's a part of it where what we think of as politics is really based on faith and it's based on fear. I mean, it's what you believe in and it's what you're afraid of. And those are the things that they can use to effectively drive all the things that are part of politics. And it's one of those things that it gets talked about sometimes, but it's become such a huge thing. And it's been shown, I think, so much in the last year with the coronavirus in particular, but it's shown all the time. It's when you look at the media and you look at how the media works, the media is very much about how can you drive people's fears and how can you pull them towards those things or against those things that they have faith in.
And it seems to me that as we get the media breaks down and becomes more disparate, like it used to be, right? We pretend like it wasn't. But, I mean, it used to be there was Republican papers and there was Democratic papers and never shall the twain meet. But as you do this, and especially in you look at MSNBC, you look at CNN, you look at Fox, they're reporting things so differently because what they're really driving is fear. And they're talking to two different audiences because what those audiences fear is different. And so because of that, you get these divisions that are running through the country. And we talk about how divided we are as a nation. And I think what divides us as a nation in a lot of ways is what we fear.
When you talk about the media, I remember in 2001, there was a year where basically, for the past couple of years, there have been a little bit of shark attacks were a little higher than they were. But not much higher. I mean, just like, but in 2001, the media started reporting on it. And the media was talking about it constantly. The media was talking about it to the point of where you literally...
Beaches were shutting down.
Right, beaches were shutting down. And you would think that, sharks were coming inland and killing people. But I remember watching it. I remember, being, what is going on with sharks? What is going on with sharks in the nation? And the only thing that stopped that coverage of that was 9/11. When 9/11 was, when the towers were bombed, that's what stopped their coverage of the great shark attack that was no greater than any other previous year. Maybe 3 or 4
maybe
more,
20% or something.
It
wasn't
was
much.
tiny when you go back and look at the numbers. It was so incredibly small. But I remember that, and I remember it being the point where I realized that fear is what drives so much of things. Fear is what drives. It's what sells papers, and it's all they're interested in is, can we use fear to drive you? And it's an incredibly powerful force.
So going back to our original jumping off point with the president and the CDC's statements about being able to take your masks off in certain circumstances, if vaccinated or not, and then a lot of governors responding to that to varying different degrees, depending on what kind of state you're in and what political party your governor is, or what political party is dominant in your state. I mean, we have a Democratic governor, but he's really opened up the state largely because it's a largely Republican state. Yeah, exactly. So with that, our jumping off point, what are the fears that are at play here when we say that there are these different reactions to wearing masks and now taking them off? What is a Republican afraid of? What's a Democrat afraid of?
And it is interesting that, it seems to me that there's two aspects of it. One is that the Democrats do seem to, in general, have a greater fear of death. Because the Republicans are going, The Republicans have a greater fear of loss of freedom, and the Democrats have a greater fear of death. So the Democrats are going, but I might die. Who cares what happens? I might die. And so you must wear a mask, even if it only makes a 3% difference. It doesn't matter. I could die otherwise. And I'm not saying the Republicans don't have any fear of death, but the first thing on the top of mind seems to be we need to be protected from everything because we might die in the Democratic mindset.
And if you went back and watched the presidential debates, which I don't recommend anybody do, in the most recent election, that point really was brought out. And I mean, obviously it was trying to score political points, but it was brought up over and over and over, the number of people who died, and you didn't do anything to keep people from dying.
And that even, right, obviously it was the Democrats that were debating, and so this is who they're appealing to, and they're appealing to the idea that the government can stop death. And I think
that goes back to your point about faith as well. I mean, that means in the end they have a fear of death, and they have a faith in government.
Right.
And in the end, that is a huge. I mean, you could almost sum up the Democratic Party in saying fear of death and faith in government.
There's a lot of things that kill you, and obviously in the end it's all sin, or death is because of sin. But they are afraid of this death because the government's saying this is what you should be afraid of. And so the fear is driven by their faith in government. Right. Government said you could die of this. Government said this thing might be as fatal as the Spanish flu. And if it was as fatal as the Spanish flu was, when the flu epidemic, that was pretty bad. That was, the estimates is that killed a lot more than World War I, and a lot of people died in World War I. I mean, that was pretty bad. And people are saying, because we have faith in government, and government said it could be this bad, that's how they get the fear. The fear is driven by their faith.
I think the fear of death is kind of fundamental to a lot of fears, perhaps even almost all fears. Just because, you have people that are very anti-vaccine. Well, why are they anti-vaccine? A lot of people, it's because they think if they get vaccinated, they're going to get sick and die. I've even heard people actually saying that people who get vaccinated, they're going to die. And so it's going right back to the fear of death. So a lot of these things is kind of like the fear of death is almost the base work that everything else is building on. So which cause of death are you going to be afraid of? And that's kind of driven by the next level of fears.
And it's what you have faith in, right? Because the Republicans in general go back to, Reagan built the party in a lot of ways, and his famous line was, the most fearful words in the English language is "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." And so the Republicans are built around the idea that what you're supposed to fear is the government. And the Democrats are built around what you're supposed to do is have faith in the government. And so when the government says you could die of this, the Republicans' response is to be afraid that the government is going to try to destroy them. So it's, what are they trying to do here? Why are they giving me the vaccine? The vaccine, it's got to be to kill me, because of the distrust in government and because they believe that the government is inherently there to harm them. Their response is going to be, I fear because of what the government does. Well, the Democrats go, I'm going to fear if the government doesn't do something. And
you can have they kind of feed off each other, because on one side, the Republicans will say what we have faith. One thing that we have faith in is kind of individual freedom, and so there's a part of it where one of the things that Democrats fear is they've been told to fear individual freedom. If you don't make people wear masks, you can't just trust people. You can't trust people to make decisions that are good decisions. You can't trust people to make decisions that are right decisions. And so you have these overlapping fears, and you have and with overlapping faith.
Right. And I think that the Republicans in general don't have much faith in the government. So when the government goes, you're going to die unless you wear a mask, they go, really?
Right. Watch me never wear a mask.
Exactly, right? Because you're trying to kill me by having me wear a mask.
Right. I used to wear a mask when I welded, and I don't wear it.
It really does come back to what you believe, because I think one of the things that's happening is that, the Republicans in general, not obviously, because everything is a spectrum. We're just talking in generalities. Well, it's really very much a spectrum. But, a lot of the Republicans are going, well, the government says this, but really...
Right.
I'm not going to be afraid of this, of COVID-19, because the government's saying that I should be afraid of COVID-19. Who trusts the government? How should Christians think about this, though? How should we be evaluating it when the government goes, you should be afraid of this?
I mean, I think from the Christian perspective, we should have fear in the proper thing. I mean, and the proper person to fear, the proper being to fear is God. I mean, and Scripture's pretty, Scripture says that this strongly, that the beginning of, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and in other verses, the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge. And so it's so foundational to life that actually fearing God, if you don't have fear of God, you don't even begin to step towards wisdom and knowledge. Which means that which is why when you look at the Democrat and Republican position, they have aspects of things that God has established in them, things that God has said is good in their view, or else their system wouldn't even work at all. It would fall apart immediately. And so there's a part of it where, like, death is something that's not desirable. Government is something that God created. And so it's not like an individual's freedom is something that God created. And so there are these things that they're part of it, but from a Christian perspective, it should be grounded in actually just fearing God, and that should be where it starts.
And some of thus far the idea of fear and faith have kind of been put out there as kind of two different aspects that are very interrelated. I think why they're so interrelated comes back to the fear of the Lord as the beginning of wisdom, because you can't fear God if you don't have some belief in God. So your belief in God drives that fear of God's punishment, and so that's how you get to them being connected.
And I would just argue also that God has ordered the world that this is true. If somebody says this house is burning down, and you go, I believe him, you get out of the house. If your 2-year-old says the house is burning down, you go, stop spreading rumors and trying to scare people. Right. Because it's very much, it is very much whether you believe that you can then respond. And so it's the same reason why you can preach the gospel to somebody and say you're going to go to hell for all eternity. And even though they know it, according to Romans 1, they've deceived themselves in their own unrighteousness to the point where they're not afraid when you say it to them. And so they go, yeah, whatever, sure.
Right.
And it's because they don't have sufficient belief to have fear. And I think that, another aspect of this is that as you think of that true fear requires faith, that means that what Christians should be doing is going, what am I trusting, and should I be trusting it?
When you say it like that, where you're framing what should I be trusting, realize that for the past year and some months of coronavirus, you have been told here's what to trust or here's what not to trust. Depending on where you are on the political spectrum, depending on what media you listen to, realize that you have been pressured to trust or distrust certain things, certain information. You're supposed to have certain responses to these, and realize that it's largely something that has been competing with God.
Right.
It has been trying to draw your fear away from a fear of God. And that's even in cases where they might be telling you the correct thing, but they're not doing it in the context of, hey, there's a providential God who rules over all things, and coronavirus is from his hand too. And your reactions to that need to be reactions to God, not reactions to this particular fear or that particular fear, if it's not a fear that's a fear of God.
And when we look at those fears that are being stoked, the response is when largely Democratic politicians were going, everybody's going to die from this, the fatality rate could be 5%, blah, 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 is instead of going, well, how do I stop it from killing me, we should look at the biblical response, which is, why is God judging us with sickness? Which is a very different response. If our faith is in God and we still believe for various reasons the statement that's made, our response should be very different if we have faith in God rather than faith in the government.
And it works the same way for Republicans too. If you're looking at the government with suspicion that they are trying to oppress you with all of these various regulations, you should be asking, why is God judging us with an unrighteous government? And because he does that,
Yes.
he does. You know, when you stop acting justly, then God will give you unjust government in order to cause you to repent.
And there's also multiple things we need to be considering at once. I mean, while it's certainly true that when sickness comes upon us, we need to be looking. You know, if a pandemic comes upon us, we need to be looking. Could we be judged for? But is a place in many cases where we also need to look at the secondary causes, because God works through means. And so often we also need to look like, so if I'm sick, I should be looking to God. Am I being judged for sin? I should also think, well, maybe, drinking from the puddle in the cow pen was not a good idea. So, so there's just multiple. I mean,
And I shouldn't go cough on everybody either, right?
Right. So not that we don't need to put real constitutions and laws in place to protect against tyrannical governments, but at the same time, if a tyrannical government comes, it's also God doing it for a reason.
The other thing that, God is true and let every man be a liar. And so God even gives us ways that when we think about, should I trust this, we're not just supposed to blindly trust it. The only thing we're supposed to blindly, so to speak, is to trust is God's word. Because God said it's his word, and we don't even do that blindly because it's the Holy Spirit that gives us eyes to see. But the idea that one of the things that's happening right now is there's a lot of people that are blindly putting faith in things. And, one of the standards that from the book of Job, it says in Job 24:25, now if it is not so, who will prove me a liar and make my speech worth nothing? When we run into somebody who's a liar, we're not supposed to keep believing them. Right. And like when Dr. Fauci, he came out and said, I lied. I mean, it was as blunt as it could be.
Right.
Yes, you didn't need a mask. The only reason I said you didn't need a mask is we didn't have enough masks. So the biblical standard is don't believe him from then on. You know he's a liar. His speech is worth nothing. And I think a lot of the reason that people can get stirred up is because they don't look biblical standards for how to judge whether I should trust this or not. And when somebody's proven to be lying, and it's a lot different to go, the science has changed now. We've gotten new things. And so now my position has changed. That doesn't make him a liar. But when he says, I lied to you because I thought it was best for the country, that makes him a liar, and you shouldn't believe him.
And the same thing's true for politicians. The same thing's true for, presidential candidates, presidents of the nation. The same thing, your pastor.
Right.
These things are we should apply them across the board.
It's definitely not a Republican and Democrat issue because, let's be serious, who won the election? Biden did, we know, because he's president. And this was what God decreed. And
right.
Could people have cheated? Yes, they could have cheated. But they kept saying they cheated in this way, and then you look at the research, and it's just not true.
Right.
And these people, though, there's a whole bunch of people that are looking back going, I know these things to be true, when the people they're believing are proven liars.
Right.
And so this happens on both sides of the spectrum. We shouldn't think that it's a Republican or Democratic thing. It's across the board. And Christians have to be going, this proves that they shouldn't be trusted. It's easy to beat up, the government and say the government lies. But, Republicans tend to have blind faith in the individual to the point where they go, if you just let everybody do what they want, unless they encroach on somebody else's liberty, that will solve the problems. Libertarianism. And libertarianism is the idea that man is basically good. And so if you just let him do what he thinks is right, everything will be wonderful. And there's plenty of evidence that proves that's a lie too.
Right. You're basically starting with a lie that man is fundamentally good. So it starts with lying to yourself about other people and lying to yourself about yourself, which is a flawed place to start.
It's the same idea of blindly believing the government is fundamentally good.
Right.
And if you don't believe in God, you believe in other things. And those things, you just need to recognize how much that those are you're building on sand because they are flawed, whether it's what Dr. Fauci said, whether it's the idea that man's basically good. All these ideas that people are really acting on and making decisions based on, including like we're not going to get a vaccine because, the government is producing the vaccine, or we're not going to get a vaccine because it was Trump's when he was president that produced the vaccine. All these things are demonstrating what your faith is in.
It's just to say the same thing, but in the terms that we're talking here. If you don't have faith in God and if you don't fear God, you're going to put your faith somewhere and you're going to put your fear somewhere. And there are so many varieties of places that could end up being. And they're all going to lead to confusion, and they're going to lead to the current political and social and civil climate that we have right now, because we are largely a nation that has forgotten the fear of God and has no faith in God.
And we think it's okay to fear anything else, including in the church, where people in the church think it's okay to have this irrational fear. It's okay to have, well, of course I'm afraid of vaccines. I mean, in homeschooling circles, this is a very normal thing to go, I'm afraid of vaccines. And I'm not pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine. That's not the point. The point is that they're not actually going, what does God say about this? They're just going, I'm afraid of vaccines. Vaccines are going to kill us.
Right. One of the things that's been going on for the past year is it's revealed, I think where I said there was a religious nature to these things, and it's revealed that religious nature. Because and religious, I mean in the sense of the trappings of religion. Because what happens in if you look at like when religions compete against each other is they bring out, one side will bring out two scientists, and the other side will go, well, we have two scientists too. And
Moses throws down the rod, and Pharaoh calls out his magi.
Right, and so there's this part of it where, you know what I mean, it's you see, and they're not even talking about what's true anymore. They're talking about what it looks like. They're talking about, and we're going to make, well, your scientist is a stupid scientist. Well, my scientist went to Harvard, and you say Harvard is good, so therefore he has to be a good scientist. So by your rules of, you know what I mean? But it's not, they're not really even talking about what's true. They're talking about how they can justify their position. They're talking about why they have faith, and they're talking about it in very basic terms. They're talking about it in, how can you say my faith isn't faith? Look, it's faith. You know what I mean? And it's
right.
just, I mean, and it's become very obvious over the past year that like when you said the woman who said, I don't want to wear the mask, what she's saying is this mask is a trapping of my faith. It's a religious identifier. And just as much as, like how, Hasidic Jews might dress, it connects. When someone looks at me, they know what I believe.
New York Times just published a story that was, I mean, I don't know how much more they could have done this without using the word religion, but they just talked about, well, now that the mask mandates have been lifted, if you're vaccinated, in the climate we've lived in where there's so much distrust, how can you trust that person who's not wearing a mask, who doesn't have the outward sign, is actually somebody who's vaccinated.
Right.
Right.
How do you believe them anymore? Because you can't see it on their face.
And those evil Republicans, they would go without a mask without being vaccinated, and that's, yeah. And
it's a very religious way to frame a problem, which is the reason that we're having this conversation.
And if you look at the studies with masks, they might have a few percentage difference in effect. Let's say optimistically, they might have a 5% reduction in chance of getting the virus at most. And yet it's not, this will help me, or this might slightly prevent other people from getting it. It's, you must wear it or you will die. Right. And it is switched from even the people that are saying this would be better. It's switched from that to something that is very religious. And it's not based on science. It's not, they keep saying follow the science, but they're not following the science. Instead, what they're doing is stoking fear, and they're stoking and building a new religion.
Right.
And I don't think the point here is to divide the country into people who wear masks and don't wear masks, Republicans, Democrats.
Because somebody's already done that.
But our point here isn't to create rigid categories. It's to identify certain generalities. I mean, I've heard people talk about why they wear a mask, and and they don't want. They know that people get worried when they see people not wearing a mask, and they just want to be kind to others and not worry people.
I've worn it for that reason.
Right, and that's not unreasonable. And so it's not that everyone who's wearing a mask is we're saying they're in petrified fear.
No.
But it's just kind of identifying certain streams of thought in the society. Not everyone doesn't fall into them.
So here, do this then as a thought experiment or as an actual experiment, depending on where you are and what state you're in and what the laws are. We're here in North Carolina, where just over last weekend, the governor lifted the general mask mandate, except in certain scenarios, public schools, public transit, healthcare. When you first go out into this new climate, whatever state you're in, where the mask laws have changed, and you are either wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, and you see people wearing masks or not wearing masks, do a self-evaluation of your psychology in those moments. Like I just the other night, I went to Walmart for the first time I was actually out in public after the mask mandates were lifted, and I remember walking around Walmart, and there are some people wearing masks and some people not wearing masks, and thinking that this is weird. What are they thinking about me? What should I be thinking about them? And think in that circumstance, ask yourself, what am I fearing? What do I have faith in? Am I afraid about what somebody thinks about me? Because that's another thing we haven't even talked about. Right. Is that really what's driving a lot of this? Am I really just afraid I'm not wearing a mask? What are people going to think about me? I am wearing a mask. What are people going to think about me? Is that what I'm really concerned about? Am I concerned about perceptions? Am I concerned about coronavirus? There's so many things, but go ahead and do the evaluation on yourself. Like Joshua was saying, we're not really trying to divide the country. We want our listeners to think,
we don't have the viewership.
We don't have the viewership to divide the country. It'd be a very small balkanization if you joined our tribe here. But run the analysis on yourself when you go out in public and you're faced with these things that we're discussing right now. And be really honest with yourself about what you're thinking here. And are you fearing God? Are you having faith in God? Or is there something else out there that's causing you to think and react and behave in certain ways when you're in public or even in private, reading the news?
And not as like a rebuke, but there's a part of it where you'll say, some people will go, I only do what I do because I follow the science. And the answer is sometimes that's not true. It's much more complicated than that. There's a part where you might say everything I do is because of this. I might say I want everything I do to be because of fear of God. But there's times where I've worn a mask or not worn a mask because of fear of other people. And I think that's part of what you're saying is there's this
fear of other people or care for other people, because you can wear one out of care for other people.
I've worn it for both.
He's just confessing here.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. There are situations where I wouldn't have normally, and I did. There are situations where I would have, I maybe would have, and I didn't. Or the calculus was done. Where I thought about it, and what I was weighing wasn't always what I said I wanted to be weighing. And I think there's this part of it where I think your experiment's really worth doing, because it's really easy to claim a certain aspect of faith and to find out that you actually have lots of other aspects of fear and faith that you're not admitting.
Which is, it's hypocrisy.
Right.
By another name.
Yes.
Again, if you evaluate fear in the church, churches are filled with all kinds of fear. It's in not godly fear. And actually, most churches teach against the idea of godly fear. We should have reverence towards God, not terror towards God. But God is a terrible God, is what the word is. He's a God who judges. He's a God who can pour out his wrath. He is a God to be feared. And so when we should really deal with what our fears are, because fears are testifying to what we're trusting in.
Yes.
And we always have a mix, right? We're all fallen. We all have sin natures. We all are fighting it. We all have an old man to put to death. But in the end, we should recognize fear really testifies to what you believe in,
right,
and what you're acting on.
And so, as just a brief aside on the idea of Christians still fearing God, a lot of people go to the verse, perfect love casts out all fear. So as Christians, we shouldn't need to fear God anymore. We should just respect him. But if you're going to say that, you have to say that you have perfect love. So as long as you have sin in your life, then you still need to be fearing God, because God is still a God that judges sin in believers. And even though on Judgment Day, every believer's sins will be covered in Christ, it doesn't mean there aren't temporal punishments on earth. So that fear is appropriate on earth for Christians.
And just to strengthen that, right, in 1 John it says that this is the love of God, to keep his commandments. So to close that loop there, the idea is that perfect love casts out all fear. So if you have loved God perfectly, meaning that you have not broken a single one of his commandments, you should have no fear of him. And so in heaven we'll have no fear of him because our corruption will be removed and we'll take on incorruption. In which case, we won't have any fear of God. We won't have any need to fear God because we will be doing exactly what he wants. But right now we should be fearing God because we don't love him perfectly. We're not obeying his commandments perfectly.
Perfect love includes perfect obedience.
Right. And that you can't have perfect love of God without perfect obedience.
Right. And this is why, Jesus Christ, he obeyed his Father perfectly. And so he would have no need to fear what his Father would, and that's really tied up in that.
Well, one of the things that we're driving to, moving on a little bit, is that faith does produce works. And the really interesting thing about the masks is you can tell that you can see that how the faith of somebody, how the fear of somebody produces particular behaviors because it's right there on their face or it's not. And so that's why we're using this as an example. Is just because we've lived in this great theological experiment, this nationwide experiment of a year where you were able to test and pressure people's faith and see what it was on the outside in various different contexts. And no, I'm not saying that you can always tell what somebody's actually fearing or not fearing if they're wearing a mask, but in generalities, the way that our nation has reacted to this really does tell you something about where we have faith and where we have fear. And that's why we're talking about it in this sort of way.
Just how different it is. Even, in the last couple of days, I went to a restaurant down in Raleigh. And you go look at the parking lot at the restaurant in Raleigh, and almost everybody was wearing masks. And you go around here where you're more in the suburbs, and almost nobody's wearing masks. You see it's a manifestation of the difference in attitude of a people even. Like you said, you can't get down to individuals because there can be all kinds of reasons for an individual. But you start to see societal patterns that show, Raleigh's a lot more liberal than where we are.
And you go out to the country, and they were wearing face masks before they lifted
even
the order. So,
even before they lifted the order, when it was against the law, and that was testifying something about their faith too. Because did I believe a mask would help me? No, I didn't. But did I wear a mask? Yes, because the government said wear a mask, and we're supposed to submit to the civil magistrate.
You weren't a free American, huh?
But that gets a bit murkier because the governor's not supposed to be telling people that, so it's not actually
and again, there's a lot of murkiness in all this that gets down into details, as to how do you submit to authorities and all those other things. But you do see patterns in society. And we should be asking ourselves, though, as it says in James 2:17 and 18, thus also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without your works, and I will show you my faith by my works. And we shouldn't deceive ourselves. We can see our faith by our works. And do you believe what God said about the civil magistrate? Do you believe what God said about disease? Do you believe looking at how you respond to things and looking to what you're fearing is a way that your faith is manifested. What you're truly putting your faith in is manifested by where your fears are.
And it's, when you think about your faith being shown by your works. We've talked about this in another podcast about how that, we talked about money and ministry, and we've talked about how that one of the issues with money is it's very easy to see and believe in because you can see the power of it. And it's one of those things that as a person, you can easily, the reason why you put money in the bank, why you put money in a 401k is because you believe that you're going to get old, and you believe that at some point that money will be useful, and you believe that putting that money in there will be useful. And every single thing you do is tied to belief. I think it's very easy for people to go through their life and only think that only certain things are driven by belief. Only certain things are driven by fear. And you can examine all of them. The experiment that Jonathan said you should do, you can do that about everything in your life. You can do that and ask yourself, why do I actually do that? And you can tell yourselves all sorts of little polite fictions, lies, about why you do things. But you can actually look at and examine and figure out why you do the things that you do. And it really, really does matter.
And it doesn't take. It's not very hard. You walk in a room. Who are you going to go talk to? Who are you not going to go talk to? You very quickly realize that it is based on certain fears in your life when you're driving down the road. How fast are you going? What are you doing at certain points? I mean, there's so much. So once you start to think about it, there's a lot of ways you can easily see fears directly driving your decisions.
Right. And I think we can all safely say that the church in America is not very bold right now. I don't think that's a very bold statement to say.
When you talked earlier about, I was thinking about that when you were mentioning just the murkiness of trying to sort through some of these things. And yeah, it's complicated, and there's, what's the right thing for me as an individual to do? And one of the difficulties was, largely speaking, the church had an opportunity to open up the Bible and say, here's what God says. Here's the principles that govern how we're going to operate as a church, and things that you need to consider as you're dealing with these issues in your own home, in your own family, in your own workplace. And the church just didn't get out in front. The church didn't get out and lead. The church wasn't what was leading the culture on this. The church was behind the science, behind the government, behind the politicians, and it was all reactionary to that instead of saying, no, here's what God says. Here's what God says you do when you're in a pandemic. Here's what God says you judge whether or not you're in a pandemic. Here's what God says about honoring the civil magistrate in certain circumstances and not in others when they're telling you to disobey him. Right. And the church just didn't really want to speak.
And especially when you go to, the leprosy laws, which would be the most parallel. And it's the priesthood that's supposed to decide those things, which means now it's the church, right? Every Christian is a priest. And so the priesthood is supposed to decide, is this leprosy? How are they quarantined? All these things. And instead the church said, we should just be quiet and let a false fear permeate through the society rather than saying, no, fear God. And if we fear God, then we'll try to do things the best we can according to how God said to do it, and God will deliver us. Instead, The church just said, we'll stop worshiping. That's fine.
No, the church didn't say we'll stop worshiping. I mean, so I'm pushing back a little. I know I agree with
I understand what you're saying.
The church just said we're going to worship something else.
Sure.
We believe that we are not the priests anymore. We believe that the scientists are the priests. We believe that the politicians are the priests. And if you want to say that faith produces works, well, it works the other way as well. You can look at the works and then extrapolate
that's what
where
I'm
the
saying
faith
we should
is
be
from.
looking at, yeah.
And so, well, where did we actually think that the authorities that should have been operating were? And we've declared scientists to be the priests of the day.
Right. And in doing that, there's nothing wrong with factual determinations by scientists. There's nothing wrong with the scientific method.
Amen.
There's nothing wrong with all these things. These are good, useful discoveries. But that's not what's happening. When they say follow the science, none of them were following the science. They were at best following the opinions of scientists that weren't necessarily based on data, because they didn't really have the data. They were just making guesses. And so it was blind faith that we were supposed to follow the scientists. And that term of blindly follow the scientist's opinion was shortened to follow the science. Well, that's not following the science at all. That's a very distortion of follow the blind, with blind faith, follow the scientist's opinions.
Right. And what you find in that circumstance is that actually there was the science, meaning the scientists, were all over the map. Mm-hmm. Any one given scientist was all over the map over time as the virus developed. And I mean, some of them, like Fauci, actually just admitted, hey, yeah, I lied to you because it wasn't expedient at the time, and then I told you the truth later, and now you should listen to me.
Right. Even this week he came out and said, now you should listen to me about not wearing a mask inside if you're vaccinated. But 2 months ago, Rand Paul said, you're lying. you don't need to wear a mask inside. Why are you sitting here with this political theater? And he said, I am not doing that. How dare you suggest that? So which time do you believe, that time or this time? I mean, and yet because the faith is in the scientists, because the faith is in Fauci, they'll believe him both times, and people are following him both times. And we need to have a standard where we have an expectation that all these things won't change, meaning not that somebody's opinion won't change, but the way they got to that opinion doesn't change. Meaning if new evidence comes, then they should change their opinion. But if it's the same evidence and there's no reason, and they said they thought through it before, why is their new thinking through any better? And instead, we're just blindly following their feelings. We're not following science. We're following the feelings of scientists.
Right, and science also doesn't tell you what to do.
Yes.
It's not something that gives you, I mean, you don't look into a microscope and come out with and find a plan of here's how to deal with things. And whenever you create, and not that it's not wise to create plans, but you're using value judgments, you're using,
risk
your scope of your
assessment,
authority, risk assessment, all these things are combining with data you've looked at and your interpretation of it to produce a plan. And so the plan is not science. The plan is something that maybe you've used science to help you determine, but it doesn't. It is not. You can't say that science says to do this.
And that's what I mean. They were trying to reduce all of that complexity down to, like, I looked in a microscope, and there can be no debate. There can be,
Right.
Your individual, your risk assessment, what you think you should do, what your particular, they were shutting down places that were like, there was almost no population. They were shutting down things where they only had like one little grocery store, and like the grocery store wasn't big enough to be open, but so now they have to drive to another town to go to the grocery store. You know what I mean? It's just absolute madness. And they go, this is science. And the church, which is supposed to be the ground and pillar of the truth, says we're willing to give up knowledge.
And just to flip it around a little bit, to use a different example that hits a little closer to home perhaps, science doesn't tell you not to abort children. Science might tell you certain things about the baby in the womb at certain times, but it doesn't tell you that lives have value inherently. That's not something you can determine just from a scientific process. That's something it's a moral principles that come from God. Now the science can back that up. The science can work in harmony with that, but it's not, science doesn't tell you to do things.
Right.
And just to kind of cycle back to the idea of what they're doing is there is a real movement to stoke fear. And the reason that we should recognize, and again, I don't want to make this just about COVID because you have that on the left, but what about the stoking of the fear on the right with the elections where they're going, all the elections are stolen, and they were stoking fear too. And we just need to recognize that if we're going to think about fear, then we need to recognize people really use fear to drive people's behavior because they recognize what they fear, that fear, what they believe in that causes them to fear that it will produce real works, and they can get people to do stuff.
That's why I brought up the thing about the sharks in the beginning. The
Right.
reason I brought it up was because I live like 3 hours from the beach. And when that was going on, I remember the music comes on.
You put up shark
No.
I put up a shark fence around my house.
I didn't behave irrationally in that sense. But what I mean is when the section would come on and you hear the music, and there would be
from Jaws.
ominous music or whatever, and it's shark attacks. What you need to know about them. And there's this part of it where you're like going, I live 3 hours from the beach, and they could cause me to start to, and they could cause me to be concerned about sharks. That should tell you something.
Which were really a couple of shark attacks down in Florida. It wasn't even close to the beach in North Carolina.
It's like, it just, and that's what I mean is I think we're so far removed from understanding how impacted we can be by things.
Well, you could say it like this. You could say fear sells, which is just flipping it a little really means you're just easily manipulated.
Yeah. Just me specifically. Can we establish that? No one else.
Charles.
Specifically me.
We will be easily manipulated if we, the fear of death is the power of sin, right? So we'll be easily manipulated if we fear death. We'll be easily manipulated in people will accrue power by manipulating our fear. And the only way to stop that accrual of power on either side is by fearing the right things.
Right.
But we shouldn't think people are just kind of dispassionate about this. And I think this is some of the evaluation that's done is people aren't going, when they do that report about how Dominion voting systems, they're all over the country and they've been connected to the internet. When they do it like that and people go, oh no, they've stole all the elections. How can we trust any of our representatives? They're doing it because it's not accidental. They're doing it to manipulate people. They're doing it to accrue power for themselves. And obviously with the voting, it's very clear how they're manipulating it to accrue power. But they're doing it with the vaccine. They're doing it with the mask. They're doing it. And we need to not think that there's a bunch of passive people out there. There's a bunch of people that understand how powerful it is to use fear to get people to do what they want them to do.
So you're either going to fear God or you're going to fear something else. And if you don't fear God, there's somebody else there who's willing to sell you a fear. And there's a whole bunch of them.
And you may not buy it with money. You might buy it with submission. You might buy it with all kinds of other things
or,
as well. Or applause.
Or you may just watch that TV show because they're going to be the ones who tell you about the tornadoes the most.
Right. And sometimes it is just money, but it can also frequently be more than just money.
Right. People talk about fear mongers all the time. And what you're saying is that they don't often talk about fear consumers, right? They don't talk about that people get up and go, I'm going shopping for what I should fear.
Fear mongers exist because there's fear consumers.
Right. Exactly.
There wouldn't be fear mongers if there weren't fear consumers.
Right.
Right. And we need to work diligently to make sure that we're not feared, that we're not the people that are we shouldn't be creating false fears in others. We shouldn't be fear mongers, but we shouldn't be the consumers either.
Right.
And I think the church, because they've moved so far in general from saying you need to fear God, they've set up their congregations and the people in them to fear all kinds of other things. And so fear runs through the churches because they don't have the counterbalance that's required. Right, it says in Matthew 10:28 through 31, and do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. First of all, this is a command, right, from Christ. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. This isn't advice. This is a command, and that's worth remembering. That means it's sin when you fear those who can kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will? But the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Do not fear, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. We shouldn't think dispassionately about this. We need to think about this and deal with this as fear, as sin. When you fear the wrong thing, it's not just, it's okay. It really is rejecting God. It's rejecting God being the one that causes the sparrows to fall out of the sky. God is the one that kills you. God is the one who kills and makes alive. When we start to fear other things and we allow people to manipulate our fears, it really is a testimony that we're walking in faithlessness. Not that we don't have faith, but it's a testimony that our actions are based on faithlessness. And to mature in faith, one of the basic ways to mature in faith is to grow in fear of God so you don't fear other things. And we need to be thinking about that and acting and working to mature that, because that is what I see as one of the biggest lacks in the American church is there's a whole bunch of fearing of other things and not that much fearing of God. And there's a whole bunch of fearing of those, oh no, the police might come and take our guns. The government might take our guns. This person might get elected and then we'll be poor and we'll die. There's all this fear that's just constantly generated because the church isn't saying, what's wrong? You're sinning. Fear God.
It's worth just saying what's the natural consequence of all of this. If fear and faith are tied that much together, then what you fear is an indicator of what you worship. And the act of fearing is itself an act of worship. Fearing God is one of the ways to worship him. And fearing something else is a way of worshiping that thing. And God's a jealous God. He wants all the worship. It doesn't belong to something or somebody or some government other than God.
And I would even make the statement, not a very bold statement, that the first act of worship that anybody ever does is fearing God. Because it's the beginning of knowledge. It's the beginning of wisdom. You cannot do any other act of worship.
True worship.
Unless you truly worship, right, an act of worship towards the true God.
Right.
That you cannot do it except by fearing God. That is always the first act of worship. So there are other acts of worship that we do later, but it always starts with fearing God. And we've taken that out of the idea of worship entirely and made it just about how he's your friend and other truths, but you can't diminish the other truths at the expense of saying, don't fear God anymore. Pastor Al Martin, that did a series of sermons on fearing God. And the point that he made, which I think is a very accurate biblical point, is the fear of God is to the Christian life what letters are to reading. Nobody, when they read, after they've read for a while, goes and says, let's see, this thing, that's an A, this is a B. But nobody can read without letters because the reading is based on letters, but nobody's going back to the letters. They know the letters. And that's what fear of God is. It undergirds everything in worship. But yet, we've said it doesn't exist after you know God, that you don't fear him, you just, enjoy him, you just, all these other things without saying, no, the fear of God is the basis for everything else. It's what all other worship rests on.
It's one of the things, I would say there's a part of it where you have to be honest with what a man is. You have to be honest with how mutable we are. You have to be, there's a part of it where when people think they don't need the fear of God, they don't know themselves. They don't know what they're actually like. They've been lying. And there's this part of it where when it's really extreme, and this is Romans 1, right? This is in a sense what God says is, to the unsaved, the thing I make known to every unsaved man is the wrath of God.
Right.
And God is exposing to them, your first response to me should be to see my wrath and to fear. And if you come at that point, and obviously this is by the work of the Holy Spirit, but that is like you're talking about, that's the first act of worship. That is the first act of worship. But people don't actually acknowledge what they're like. And they don't even acknowledge what they're like. Everybody goes, once we're saved, we still continue to sin. And they can't see that immediately means, obviously, the fear of God is going to be part of your life.
Right.
And they don't see that connection. And so, there's this part of it. Like I said, one of the things is the doctrine is really lacking in the church today. And we haven't connected these things together so that Christians can think about who they are and they can think about why God has framed the world the way he has.
And they can't see how you have to have fear for sanctification. Because the reality is that he scourges every son he receives. This is how we're sanctified, is that we see sin, he punishes us for sin. We see that we were punished for the sin and we turn from the sin. And I'm not saying God can't teach us and do other things. The picture is the relationship between a father and a son. But there is an aspect that is promised that some of the sanctification is from fear of God. It is from receiving his just judgment.
It's the rod of correction, and it's thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me.
Right.
And to think that, you ask any parent who disciplines their children. Children love to know their boundaries. And there's this part where, everyone does. People love to know their right place. For someone to define the worst thing in the world is to not know who you are, to know what you are, to know where your place is. And this is a real thing that God gives us. And with our sin, it is that correction when we step outside of that is a part of understanding our place and knowing where we are with him. And you cannot separate those two.
Think about it as an employee. You could be at a job where you've got a really nice boss who doesn't tell you what you should do or what your expectations are. Or you could have a boss who's just kind of a curmudgeon, but you know really clearly what you're supposed to be doing. One of those is going to be a lot easier to work for than the other one.
Right.
And it may not be the one that you initially think when you meet them and shake their hand, and one of them's kind of gruff and the other one's really warm and friendly. But one of them is going to give you the boundaries and enable you to do your job successfully, and the other one isn't.
Right. You're going to be completely frustrated constantly with the one, and he's just going to smile at you and,
And I don't know what to do next. And
we've been tying fear to faith. And one of the things that we should recognize is that when we fear the wrong thing, it's usually idolatry. Sometimes it can be confusion about this is what God wants. but so that we fear something that we shouldn't fear. But a lot of times it's just flat out idolatry. And as a society, we're moving in that direction. I mean, what I think of when I think of pagans is pagans say we don't understand anything about the world, so we're afraid of everything. And we're getting pretty close to that in America. This is what post-Christian America we should expect it to look like. We used to have this idea of rugged individualism, that anybody could go out into the West and we could conquer the West, and everybody could go and they could get in their Conestoga wagon and go across. And, and the idea was that we don't need to fear these things, that we have manifest destiny, right? Which is the idea that God has given us this stuff, so of course we're going to conquer it. And so because of that, in many ways false, but that fear, starting with God, there was a bravery, and there wasn't this, we're scared of everything. But as that breaks down and as the church stops teaching that, what it's going to produce is we're just going back to paganism, where we're afraid of everything and that we worship everything because we have nothing to put a check on our fears.
Right. You look at people kind of normalizing living in constant anxiety. I mean, that goes right along with that is you're worried about everything in your life, or certain major basic things in your life, you're worried about them. And that's not something that it's even a disorder as much as it's part of life.
And that's kind of what I was meaning by about how this past year or so it stripped away some of our the facade of what we believed gave us stability. There's this point where we're getting to where all the things that we've used before to reassure ourselves aren't doing it. Where we're not, mm-hmm. How do we know? How do we know what we know? And we're going, what changed? What changed? And there's something fundamental that has changed. I mean, and we have, as a culture, rejected who God is, and God is turning us over to this madness. And so there's this part of it where what we've thought of, science can be the answer, and God's like, nope. You know what I mean? And so I think all these different things, there is a part of it where God is revealing the foolishness of our idols, and he's leaving us to ourselves, and we're finding out that we are, that you can be cultured pagans. You can be civilized pagans.
Rich pagans, right?
Right.
We can be rich pagans.
I mean, you just go through and list these things that we would say, that as Christians we could say, hey, these things are idols. Have you been putting your trust in the government? How's that worked out for you? Yeah, I don't care what political party you are. Do you think the government's really been doing a great job either running elections or dealing with a pandemic? Maybe you put your trust in science or the healthcare system. How'd that work out for you this past year? Maybe you put your trust in yourself. Well, okay, you've been locked up by yourself. And when you were done with all of Netflix, what was left?
Disney Plus.
At some point, any one of your idols that you may not have acknowledged as idols, but anything that is out there that's really competing to be an idol, God's just kind of been touching every one of them over the past year and showing the absurdity of them. And people who have faith in God are going to be able to see that. They're going to be able to see that he's been using this to sanctify them. And other people, hopefully, are going to be able to see, I was trusting in that thing. I'm not trusting in God. I need to be converted. And other people are going to be totally blind to it.
And it seems to me that there's a huge number of people that are totally blind to it. I mean, the people that are like, yeah, he lied, but he didn't really mean, he lied intentionally, but this time he's telling the truth, and I know he's telling the truth this time. And again, fallacy Trump happens with both of them. So
right.
It's not
potato.
Right. It's what's the
difference? It was for our own good.
It was for our own good. So next time it will be for our good. So it doesn't matter whether he's telling the truth or not. And there is a separation of truth from reality, that people see a reality that it says that it's not truth-based, but this is what's real. He lied, but his lie was for our good, so therefore it was true, even though it really wasn't true. And there's this and again, one of the signs of God removing himself from a people is confusion. And boy, is there a lot of confusion in America. There is just unbelievable confusion, which drives you back to fearing all kinds of things and random fears and fears coming from every angle, because you lose the ability even to to follow a line of reasoning. You lose the ability to look at evidence and go, this is true, this is false. You ignore all these things because God does send confusion as a judgment. You can't tell a difference between a boy and a girl.
Right.
Talk about confusion.
Right. You argue that there's no such thing as a boy or a girl.
The idolatry of science, even somehow, even though science would say, genetically, there's a boy and a girl, there's no question. But people are like pointing to science, and scientists are saying, oh, no, it's gender dysphoria and all this other garbage that they're going, you can't know. And yet they are calling themselves scientists. We've, as you said, there's probably another podcast in this about separating, what is science, what is knowledge, what is understanding. Epistemology is always a good thing to understand. What this last year has really pointed out to me is just how, like my wife was saying, like in February of last year, at least we won't be like China, at least we won't be like Singapore, where everybody will be locked in their homes for months. This is America. That can't happen here. Well, no, it certainly can happen here. That we want to look at ourselves and compare ourselves to pagan nations and think that we still have vestiges of Christianity. And one of the things that God has very much pointed out is that's not this country. And the church better go. That's not this country. We need to start evangelizing. And why don't we evangelize? Well, people will look at us bad. They'll cancel us.
Right.
We fear man rather than fearing God. Your fear is demonstrated by your works. And the church should be asking, what are our works that testify that we have faith in God? So as we come to the end of this discussion, I want to come to the end of Ecclesiastes and the last two verses in it, chapter 12, 13, and 14. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. This is what we need. We need to fear God more. We can see it by everything that's happening in our culture. And the church needs to be saying this to people. Because if all we do is say that you should fear the government, you should fear all these other things, we're just teaching people to worship falsely and to worship idols. Fear God. That's where true peace is. That's where true happiness is. That's how is the best way to get through the events in this world and in this life. It's the best way to serve God. So anyway, thank you for joining us.
This has been The Conquering Truth, a project of Reformation Baptist Church. If you found this helpful, you can visit us online at theconqueringtruth.com and subscribe here or in your favorite podcast app. Thanks for watching.